Get out and vote, please.
Make your votes count. It is Election Day, and thousands of Western New Yorkers are casting their ballots in the presidential and local elections. We have live team coverage at polling sites across our area with everything you need to know when you vote. Plus, election security, how Western New York leaders are stepping up to make sure every vote is counted and protected.
After a windy and wintry start to the month, we are looking at a big-time pattern shift toward lots of sunshine. I'll let you know how long that lasts coming up in your forewarned forecast.
You gotta vote, and if you don't, then too bad for you.
Yes, to make this country better. Let the Lord step in and put the right person in.
Well, thousands of Western New Yorkers are making their way to the polls to cast their ballots in person for an election like we've never seen before. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on News 4 at 4 on this Election Day. I'm Christy Kern. Polls have been open for several hours now, and they close at 9 o'clock tonight. And we want to get right to our team coverage right now. We have team coverage of reporters spread out across Western New York at your polling locations. We begin that team coverage this afternoon with News 4's Chris Horvitz. He is live at the Board of Elections. Chris, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Christy. Well, by very rough estimate, maybe about half of the expected voters in Erie County for this election had already cast a ballot prior to today, Election Day. They estimate a presidential year usually brings a turnout in the upper 70s, lower 80s% of registered voters. Between absentee voters and people who voted early, 38.8% of people had already voted by the time they woke up this morning, and that's with absentee ballots still coming in by the day. This is the first presidential election in which early voting is possible here in New York, and anybody, of course, was eligible to request an absentee ballot this year due to COVID-19.
Of course, presidential election years are the higher turnout years, but this presidential election seems to have garnered the enthusiasm of the voters and captured the enthusiasm of voters like no other election.
We went through early voting, and it was a really, really heartwarming 9 days worth of elections. You know, our inspectors were putting themselves out there, making sure the public was able to vote.
Elections officials here in Erie County say only one other county in New York, Richmond County, which is where Staten Island is, had a higher percentage of registered voters vote early. And those early votes are going to be the very first ones to be counted here. That's going to happen just after today's polls close at 9 o'clock or so. And then today's votes will be counted, and absentee ballots won't even be opened until November 17th. Reporting live at the Board of Elections, Chris Horvitz, News 4.
All right, Chris, thank you. Well, in many areas, voter turnout seemed to be just as intense today as it was last week. But as News 4's Al Vaughters tells us, the lines were not as long because there were more places to vote.
The Delavan Grider Community Center in Buffalo seemed much calmer on Election Day than most of last week, when early voting lines stretched out the door and around the block.
But I hope, yeah, I went past them, and it was lines and people waiting all outside. I said no, but this time it was easy, so I'm glad. I'm glad I waited.
With few local elections up for grabs, many of these Buffalo voters were focused on the national races.
I think all of the elections are important, but this one is definitely more imperative for us to get who we need to stand up for us within office. Somebody that listen to our voice and listen to our congressmen's voices.
In the suburbs, there were a number of hotly contested local races. But in Amherst, for instance, it was almost impossible to vote early last week without standing in line for hours. So folks waited and showed up on Election Day. A lot easier. At 92 years old, Jerry Stevens of Amherst told us he was not about to stand in the rain to vote for hours last week. And while he has an interest in some of the local races, the top of the ticket is on his mind.
I'm not enthralled with the man I voted for today, but when I look at the party that's behind the other man, I'm absolutely scared to death.
These two retired nurses told us voting is how they think they can make a difference.
Oh my God, it was life or death.
I'm so afraid of where our country may go. If you got to vote, and if you don't, then too bad for you, you know?
In Amherst, Al Waters, News 4.
Well, News 4's Sarah Miekowitz continues our team coverage in the South Towns right now with what voters are experiencing there. Sarah, good afternoon.
The lines on Election Day are looking a lot different than what we've seen throughout all of early voting. Here at this polling place in Lackawanna, there's not much of a wait time at all. This is at St. Anthony's Church in Lackawanna. One voter we talked to says she wanted to wait on Election Day because it was convenient for her. Voters say they think having people vote early and the amount of absentee ballots helped keep lines short today. In some places, voters were in and out of the polling place in a matter of minutes, each one stressing the importance of getting out to vote.
It's a civic duty. Not only that, man, you know what I'm saying, it's a God-given right, you know what I'm saying, as American citizens. So, of course, you know, if you don't vote, you have no say-so. So, you know, that's just how it goes.
It's very important to make everything better.
There also wasn't much of a wait time around noon at West Seneca West Senior High School. One voter there says he voted on Election Day with his family because it's a tradition. Another voter says he procrastinated getting to the polls, and today was the final day to cast his ballot, so he made sure he got out to vote. Voters have until 9 p.m. to get to their polling place to cast their ballot. For now, in Lackawanna, Sarah Miekowitz, News 4.
Well, it was smooth sailing at the polls in some areas of Niagara County. News 4's Angelica Morrison has an update for us this afternoon. Angelica.
Christy, thousands of voters came out to cast their ballots today, joining the thousands more who had already casted their ballots during early voting. At last check, the Niagara County Board of Elections says about 62,000 folks have voted so far in the county. That includes votes from early voting and today. The lines at polling places in Niagara Falls, North Tonawanda, and Lockport started out long, but then got shorter throughout the day. The workers at the polling sites say they were not only busy helping people vote.
Well, we have an extra person here. Everybody has to wear a mask. We have an extra person here who's cleaning everything as we go. And so every time somebody goes into a booth, they clean it before the next people. We just keep wiping down the pens and
polls close at 9 tonight. Republican Election Commissioner Jennifer Sandanato says that an election inspector will stand at the back of the line, and once the polls close, that person will turn away any folks who are arriving late. In the newsroom, Angelica Morrison, News 4.
Okay, Angelica, thank you. And we have some important information. If you experience election fraud or voter interference today, you can call the local U.S. Attorney's Office or the local FBI office. You can also call the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. The complaint form is also online, and you can go to civilrights.justice.gov.
Tens of millions across the country have already voted, and tonight millions more are expected to cast their ballot. I'm Skyler Henry in Alexandria, Virginia, as Election Day is underway.
Get out and vote, please. It's your duty as an American.
Plus, the message from a local World War II veteran about the importance of voting this election. That's coming up next on News 4 at 4.
You're watching News 4 at 4 with Christy Kern and meteorologist Andrew Baglini.
Well, polls are now open across the country, and in many places, voters are standing in long lines to make their voices heard. Those votes will be added to the roughly 100 million early votes. In the final hours of the 2020 election, President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden are making their final pushes to rally their supporters. Skyler Henry has the very latest from the campaign trail.
President Trump visited the Republican National Committee headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, to thank the staffers who helped run his re-election campaign. Without citing evidence, he said allowing states to continue counting votes past Election Day is dangerous.
You have to have a date, and the date happens to be November 3rd, and we should be entitled to know who won on November 3rd.
Overnight, the president returned to the White House after holding 5 rallies in 4 battleground states. He's promised the crowds from his rallies will show up to the polls on Election Day like a red wave.
Good to be home.
Vice President Biden spent the morning in Scranton, Pennsylvania, to visit his childhood home with his 2 granddaughters. Inside, he signed a wall with the words, "From this house to the White House, with the grace of God." Last night, he made a final pitch to voters in the battleground state.
The vast majority of Americans are done with the chaos, the corruption, the failure.
From Connecticut to California, polls are now open across the country.
I think everybody needs to get out and vote, make it happen.
This is a very important election. It's going to change the history of our country.
Here in Alexandria, Virginia, and in polling locations across the country, election officials are working to prioritize the health and safety of voters with coronavirus protocols, including signage encouraging social distancing, mask wearing, and plexiglass partitions.
It's unclear if a winner will be declared tonight, as some states could take days to count all the ballots. Skyler Henry, CBS News, Alexandria, Virginia.
Well, a lot of people are on edge this election day, and local leaders are keeping their eyes on risks of election-related violence. And we spoke to Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown about this over the weekend. Mayor Brown says while he doesn't think the city will see any violence around the city, he is willing to do what it takes to make sure every vote is counted and protected.
What is happening is important, that everyone who wants to vote has the opportunity to vote, and that every vote that is cast should be counted. And so if it takes another day or 2 days or more to count every vote, that is important to happen, and there should not be any violent protests in the greatest democracy in the history of the world.
New York's Attorney General is warning about last-minute attempts to spread misinformation. Letitia James says her office is actively investigating allegations that voters are receiving robocalls encouraging them to stay home. James calls this disturbing, illegal, and she says it will not be tolerated. And also, just a reminder, if you experience election fraud or voter interference today, you can call the local U.S. Attorney's Office or the local FBI office. You can also call the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C. The complaint form is also online, and you can find that on civilrights.justice.gov. Well, exercise your right to vote. That is the message from a local veteran. World War II veteran Bob D'Angelo says he woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, eager to cast his vote. We spoke with him today at Olympic Restaurant in the town of Tonawanda. The 93-year-old says voting is not only important to protect his community, but also the country.
I figured it was my duty, the least I can do, and just vote for a better America the way it used to be.
Well, all polling sites will be open until 9 o'clock tonight. From the campaign trail to the classroom, a school in Vermont is making sure its middle school students are in the know, even though they can't vote. Jolie Sherman has that story.
Middle school is a time where they start to form habits and they start to make some decisions going forward. And I think if we can get them excited about the fact that they have a voice and a chance to start to find their voice, that this may be some habits that carry forward.
Stan Williams has been a high school teacher for 25 years, but for the first time, he's teaching middle schoolers.
How many of you have seen a ballot before? For the last few weeks, we have used the election as kind of the vehicle to do all of our work. It's obviously an engaging current event in numerous ways, and it's a great way to practice a lot of the skills that we feel like we need to.
And his students would agree.
I'm thinking in my head, next election, I'm going to be able to vote, so it's like I got to start thinking about this all, because who knows what's going to happen.
On Monday, students were able to read articles, watch videos, engage in interactive maps, and predict a winner based on the electoral votes.
We have done some simulations where we've played with if you were the Trump campaign, if you were the Biden campaign, which 5 states would you focus on, why, how much money would you put in towards those?
Which has helped them learn about the race from the candidate's point of view.
And we also talked about some states that are important because they are battleground states.
And we were learning about if the candidates would travel to those states depending on if they were what they were looking for, and then to win them over for the election.
On election night, students will be able to participate in a virtual watch party and see their predictions play out.
It looks like a lot of people are voting Biden from our polls, which we've been seeing. I'm just hoping that we get someone that knows what they're doing, if it's Trump again or it's Biden. I just want someone that's going to worry about the people and make sure they're all right first. the people is what makes up the United States.
You know, it's a big night in the country, and so hopefully we wanted to have a place for them to come and be together, and they can ask questions and get updates or just kind of see how the night is progressing.
Now, your forewarned weather forecast, certified Buffalo's most accurate.
All right, let's take a live look over downtown Buffalo on your election day right now. It's pretty gloomy out there today, that is for sure. But the good news, as we check in with our meteorologist, Andrew Baglini, is that, Andrew, things have calmed down since yesterday, and especially last night. My goodness, it was very windy last night.
Heard that, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
And I felt it.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yes. At a certain point, I felt like my ears were starting to hurt because the wind was whipping so much.
Worst? Yeah, yes. It's the cold ear pain. That's my least favorite, I think. And we had some gusts here in Buffalo, Christy, close to 50, 55 miles an hour. I think the highest one we saw was a 57-mile-an-hour gust briefly and 53 at the airport. Definitely a blustery night. We had those wind advisories. It's much calmer out there now. It will be breezy again a little bit tonight, but not nearly at the same level. You take a look at some of the remnant